Tywin Lannister, being blind and crippled, to some had seemed a very odd choice as Aegon III's hand of the king, given his mutilations were on the order of his mother, Rhaenyra. But the crippled hand had always treated the king with difference. Understanding more than most the sensitivity of the boy, he spoke to him gently, seeking to guide him and teach him, rather than command. Unwin Peake made a sterner, more forceful hand. Brusque and hard, he showed little patience with the young monarch, treating him more like a sulky boy than the like of a king, and making no effort to involve his grace in the day-to-day rule of his kingdom. It was very clear from the onset that Peake had little care or understanding of what troubled the damaged young Aegon. When Aegon retreated back into silence, solitude, and brooding passivity, after all the progress he had made before the death of Tywin, his new hand was more than pleased to ignore him, save on very rare, certain formal occasions when his presence was required. Rightly or wrongly, Sir Tywin Lannister had been perceived as having been a weak and ineffectual hand by some of the more power-hungry members of the court, yet somehow also sinister, scheming, and even monstrous at the same time. Lord Unwin Peake came to the handship determined to demonstrate his strength and sent a message to any who he thought might oppose him. "This hand is not blind, nor veiled, nor crippled," he announced before the king and the court. "This hand can still wield a sword." And saying so, he drew his longsword from its scabbard and raised it high so all might see it. Whispers flew about the hall. This was no common blade that Unwin Peake held, but one forged of Valyrian steel, orphan maker, last seen in the hands of bold John Roxton as he lay about at Hugh Hammer's men in the yard at Tumbleton. The feast day of our father is an auspicious day for making judgments, the Septons teach us. In 133 AC, the new hand decreed that it should be a day when those who had previously been judged would at last be punished for their crimes. This included countless who had yet to have their sentences delivered from their part in the Dance of the Dragons. The city's jails were crowded to bursting, and even the deep dungeons below the Red Keep were somehow near full. Lord Unwin emptied them in one day. The prisoners were marched or dragged out into the square before the Red Keep's gates, where thousands of Kingslanders gathered to see them receive their dues. With the sombre young king and his stern hand looking down from the battlements, the king's justice set to work. As there was too much work for one sword alone, Tossaria the Tiger and Lord Unwin's personal guard were tasked with aiding him. It would have gone much more quickly if the hand is sent to the Street of Flies for butchers, Musher observed, for it was butchers' work they were about to do, hacking and cleaving. 40 thieves had lost their hands. 8 rapers were gelded and marched naked to the riverside to be put aboard ships for the war. A suspected poor fellow who preached that the Seven sent the winter fever to punish House Targaryen for incest had his tongue removed. 2 pox-ridden whores were mutilated in unspeakable ways for passing the pox to dozens of men. 6 servants found guilty of stealing their master's coin had their noses slit. A 7th, who cut a hole in the wall to peek upon his master's daughters in their nakedness, had the offending eye plucked out as well. Next came the murderers. 7 were brought forward. 1, an innkeep who had been killing some of the guests he judged would not be missed and stealing their valuables since the time of Jaehaerys, where the other murderers were hanged straightway. He had his hands hacked off and burned before his eyes. He was hung by a noose and disemboweled as he strangled. Last came the 3 most prominent prisoners, the ones that the mob had been waiting for. Yet another Shepard Reborn, one of many that would pop up in the wine sinks of King's Landing from time to time, for many years after the Dance of the Dragons. The second was a captain of a Pentoshi merchant ship who had been accused and found guilty of bringing the fever from the sisters to King's Landing. How this was proven is unknown. The last and by far the most important in terms of the history of Westeros and the Dance of the Dragons was the former Grand Maester Orwyle, now nothing more than a convicted traitor and deserter from the Night's Watch. The King's Justice, Sir Victor Risley, attended each of them himself. He removed the heads of the Pentoshi and the false shepherd with a headman's axe, but Grand Maester Orwyle was granted the honour of dying by sword, in view of his age, high birth, and long servitude. When our father's feast was done, and the mob before the gates disappeared, the king's hand was well satisfied, wrote Septon Eustace, who would be departing for the Stony Sept the next day. Would that I could write that the small folk returned to their homes and hovels, to fast and pray and beg for forgiveness from their own sins. But that would be far, far from the truth. Flushed with blood, they sought out dens of sin instead, and the city's alehouses, wine sinks and brothels were crowded unto bursting, for such is the wickedness of men. Mushroom says the same, though in his own way. Whenever I see a man put to death, I like a flagon and a woman afterwards to remind myself that I am still alive. In the end, the net result of this public spectacle was the refilling of the now empty jails across the city, not the impact the Hand had hoped his display of power would achieve. King Aegon III stood atop the gatehouse battlements of the Red Keep throughout the feast of our Father above, and never spoke nor looked away from the bloodletting below. The boy seen his own mother burned and eaten by his uncle's dragon. None of the horror he saw that day could match that. The king might as well have been made of wax, observed Septon Eustace. Grand Maester Monkin also echoes him. His grace was present, as was his duty, yet somehow seemed far away, well lost in memory. Some of the condemned turned to the battlements to shout out cries for mercy, but the king never even seemed to see them, nor hear their desperate words. Even if Aegon had been mentally present that day, there was little chance that Unwin Peake would have allowed for him an inch of authority over the events. Make no mistake, this feast was served up by the Hand, and it was him who gorged upon it. It was clear to all after that day that Unwin Peake was in control of King's Landing, the Regency Council, most importantly of all, the fragile boy king, Aegon III.